Hey, so psychology time, right? So we move from math to psychology and behavior. And I want to start with a brief comment about how the scope and the kind of work we've been doing in the moral AI chair has changed quite a lot in the course of the project. Because if you remember the old days, 4 years ago, there were strong limits about what people could try to do with AI because people in general did not have access to advanced AI. So there were strong constraints on the kind of stuff they would try to do with it. And then everything changed, of course, when OpenAI unleashed ChatGPT onto us. And suddenly, everyone basically had access to a pretty good large language model, and there was an explosion in the kind of things that everyday people could try to do with AI. And so we spent quite a lot of time trying to map and anticipate and survey the new kind of behaviors that resulted from massive access to AI, the kind of behavior people would accept from machines, the kind of behavior they would engage in, and the new kind of behaviors they would engage in when using AI. And I'm not going to go into this long list of conceptual pieces, but I want to give you first a feeling of the broad categories of questions that we're now interested in. So in our behavioral work, we are broadly concerned with four big questions. The first question is alignment. That's the oldest, if you wish, issue that we've been investigating, which is that if we give machines the power to make decisions that impact people, or a decision which have to balance moral values or make different trade-offs, then how do people want the machines to make this kind of impactful decision? How do we align the behavior of those machines to the values of humans? The second question we've been increasingly interested in as a result of, well, development in China, for example, and the rise of the social credit score is how do people react about being judged by machines? How do people think and conceive of the fact that machines may be used to do some kind of moral profiling of them that may have consequences? Third question is cooperation, which is how do people cooperate with machines? The problem is that cooperation between humans very often depends on some kind of concern that we humans have for what happens to other humans. And that's one of the building block of cooperation, is that we have some level of concerns for the outcomes of each other. The problem is that this breaks down when people have to cooperate with machines, because a priori, we do not have a concern for what happens to machines. You know, in a classic behavioral experimental economic setting, we would measure cooperation by having humans interact in a task where what they do has an impact of the kind of money another person will make in the experiment. But of course, that doesn't work with machines, because why would I care about a machine making some money? What is the machine going to make with the money, right? It's not going to buy a sandwich. So how do we, generally speaking, in and outside of the lab, how do we make sense of why people would cooperate with machines and care about what happens to the outcomes of the machines? And the final question is the disruption in the moral norms that we have as a society, linked to the way machines are transforming our interactions. And I'm going to say a bit more about this. So initially, I wanted to give you one example of each research question, and I now realize that this is not going to work. There's way too much. So I'm going to concentrate on one example of the first topic and one example of the last topic, using some work that we've been doing this year. So the first question is alignment. Okay, and the example I'm going to give is aligning AI for social welfare benefits. That is, how do we program? What kind of choices do we make when we deploy AI to make decisions that allocate benefits to people? It could be housing benefits, it could be childcare support, it could be disability pensions, but we are increasingly using AI systems to make this kind of decision, and that opens question about the kind of trade-off we want to accept. So why? Because if you look at the way, at the discourse around using AI for welfare benefit allocation, you can hear mostly two things. On the plus side, all the governments which are deploying these systems insist on the speed gains. That is, the machines allow us to make a decision, an allocation decision, much more rapidly than if you're still only using humans to make this kind of decision. And this is like a good argument, right? Because the key notion here is that when people apply for a benefit, they might need it urgently. If they can get the benefit in 10 days rather than 3 months, then this can have a high impact on their well-being because the urgency is there. The problem is that when you look at what happens when these systems are deployed, something that is sometimes left unsaid and sometimes very explicitly said is that another of their objectives is to reduce fraud, that they are calibrated toward detecting illicit applications for welfare benefits. And because they're calibrated toward decreasing fraud and detecting fraud, what happens is that the rate of false rejections increases, and sometimes quite dramatically. I don't have time to go through the real-life example, but just believe me that I've now seen at least 5 scandals in 5 different countries about the increased rate of false rejections when we start using AI. Okay, so what do we do when we want to know how well the population, citizens of a country, want this to be done? So we said, okay, so we might get speed gains, but we might get accuracy losses, increased false rejection. So is there an exchange rate that people are willing to accept? You know, if we can actually make the decisions 5 weeks faster, does it make it okay that there is a 3% increase in false rejections? Is that acceptable? So experimentally speaking, we're going to do something like this. We explain to people, okay, imagine that you would apply for a social benefit. Currently, the average waiting time to get a decision is 8 weeks. But there is the option to use AI. On average, the AI would cut down the decision time by 1 week. So you would get it in 7 weeks, but there is a 5 percentage point increase in the rate of rejection, false rejections. So in that case, how willing would you be to stay with humans, stay in the current situation, or to move to the AI system? And of course, we can vary the speed gains and the accuracy losses orthogonally. And in this study, we use 36 combinations. And by having a nationally representative sample of a country, look at all these combinations and express their preferences, we can try to measure the exchange rate that people are willing to accept. Okay, when you do this with a nationally representative sample, you get absolutely beautiful curves. I'm not showing them, so trust me. They're absolutely beautiful, and they seem to tell an incredibly clear story about the exchange rate that people are willing to accept. Basically, people think a 3 to 5 percentage point increase in false rejection is worth a 1 week speed gain in the decision. So that seems to be a lot. That means that if we could cut the decision time from 8 weeks to 4 weeks, people would be okay with a 20% increase in false rejection. Knowing, of course, that when your application is rejected and you think it's falsely rejected, there is an appeal process. There's always a redress process. It takes time, but it exists. Okay, so at the aggregate level of the population, it seems that you have an incredibly clear story. Okay, there's an exchange rate, and so governments, we want to deploy this kind of AI system, can use this exchange rate to calibrate the behavior of the system. The problem is that the aggregate results at the level of population are very, very deceptive. Because if you zoom in on subgroups of the population, you might find very different patterns of preferences. And sometimes these patterns are lost in the aggregate results because the subgroup you're zooming in can be quite small. But small does not mean unimportant, because sometimes these small groups might actually contain the primary stakeholders. For example, the people who actually apply for social benefits. And when you zoom it on the most vulnerable groups, for example, people who are lower income, lower educated, older, and themselves in need of welfare application, then you might find that their preferences are completely different from the rest of the population. And long story short, they absolutely do not care about speed gains. For them, an increase in the risk of false rejection is incredibly aversive. And if you actually talk to this person, you understand why. They said it's complicated enough to apply. And if I get a false rejection, the process is going to be even more complicated. And it's just so overwhelming that they're saying, no, okay, maybe if you tell me that you can cut down the time from 8 weeks to 1 week with like a minute increase in the risk of false rejection, maybe that would be okay. But anything else is not okay. So you have this heterogeneity in the population that you're losing if you don't directly talk to the primary vulnerable stakeholders. But what makes it even worse is that even well-intentioned people who don't have this lived experience are completely incapable of anticipating that the primary stakeholders have different responses. We have this fascinating asymmetric insight result, which is that when we ask people who actually need social welfare benefits to do this experiment, but pretending that they don't need welfare benefits, so we ask them to predict what the rest of the population wants, they're perfectly able to give us unbiased estimates of what the general population wants. They know what others who don't need the social benefits would say. But when we ask people who don't need social benefits to predict the responses of the people who do, this basically respond at random. They have zero notion of what the welfare applicants want. So long story to tell you that whenever we do this kind of measurement of the preferences of the population, we can never assume that the aggregate data we get from the population is going to reflect the preferences of the actual stakeholders, especially if the stakeholders are a dominated, powerless group and small group. And we can never even assume that even the best intentioned non-stakeholder will understand what the actual stakeholders want. Okay. All right. I'm going to go fast for the other one. The other one is fun, though. And it's dramatically represented here. So what I've been looking at recently is the potential social disruption brought by people using large language model to detect lies. It's fun, you can do it. I give GPT-4 my emails oftentimes, and I ask it, okay, do you think that person is sincere with me, or do you think the person is lying? And you know, it's always the same thing with GPT. Maybe it cannot do it, but it's going to try. It's going to tell you something. And I'm going to say, oh, I don't know, because this paragraph here is suspicious. I think the person is lying. I would never trust it, but the thing is, some people will trust it. And some people are going to use that to try to detect if other people are sincere. And to be honest, I mean, we've made progress with algorithms that detect insincerity. I think the main economic impetus originally was that we needed, well, Amazon needed to detect fake reviews of products, or Yelp needed to detect fake reviews of restaurants. So algorithms were deployed to try to predict, based on the text of a review of a product, if the person was actually sincere or if this was basically a non-sincere review. So, all right. So if we put ourselves a little bit in the future, maybe people are going to want to use this kind of lie detection algorithms with their text application, their email application, or whatever. So very, very briefly, we were interested in the transition between the current social equilibrium, which is that currently what happens is that we all lie a lot to each other. We're not really good at detecting when people lie. We're very, very bad actually at it. And as a result of these two things, we don't accuse other people of lying. If you tell me you cannot come to the meeting because you have another engagement, might be a lie. But I'm not going to tell you, oh, are you sure of that? Can I see your calendar? Because I have the, no. So the current social equilibrium is that people lie a lot and no one calls them on lying except in very special cases like criminal justice and politics. But in everyday life, we don't go accusing others of lying. And what we were interested in seeing is if people have access to some kind of lie detection algorithm, even though they don't really know what the performance of the algorithm is, are we going to see a disruption of this social equilibrium? Are we going to move to a world where if I send you an email saying I cannot come to the meeting, you're going to tell me, hey, I trust you. I have every reason to trust you, but I need to bring up that when you sent me the email, my lie detection plugin told me that you were probably lying. So maybe there is like a misunderstanding. Maybe you confused 2 days. What's up? So are we going to offload the liability of accusing people of lying onto the algorithms? And the response is yes. In the experiments we're doing with incentive compatible designs where there's real money at stake in accusing others of lying or not, we find that in a baseline condition without AI, we find the usual results that people are very careful about accusing others of lying, but as soon as we give them access to, well, a language model that we fine-tuned on detecting lies on a specific situation, people go completely ape with accusing people of lying. So basically, the numbers are not going to tell you a lot, but in our baseline treatment, again, there's a lot of money at stake. We have a 20% accusation rate in the interaction that people have. As soon as people get the AI and the AI is saying, I think that person is lying, the accusation rate climbs to 85 to 90%. So everyone is now accusing every other of lying, with a lot of financial implications for everyone involved. All right, I think Serge wanted me to stop, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. So are there questions, maybe, on this? Yes. Michael.
So thanks a lot for the, in particular, the last example. You think that people will become more cautious, more politically correct? The fact that they can be accused, okay, this might modify the way they communicate.
It can totally modify the way they communicate, but what is the most plausible outcome is not that people are going to try to express themselves differently when they lie or say the truth is that they will ask a machine to actually write the messages, and that's another angle of the work we're doing, which is to actually go and look at the arms race between people, for example, in negotiation situations. The arms race between people using large language models to craft messages that will persuade the others, and the other using another language model to try to retro-engineer what has been going on and what are the true intentions of the humans. Those experiments can be a bit boring for people because basically the machines are doing everything. So you ask your machine to try to persuade the other player, but the other player is asking his or her machine whether they can trust your machine, and yes. So human interactions might actually become a bit boring because the machines are going to interact instead of us.
Yeah, I find the last case very interesting too, Jean-François. So there's this argument that goes back, I think, to David Lewis, that purports to show that lying in a language game doesn't really make sense. It's irrational, at least if it's easy to see that you're going to lie, because it's just an extra effort, and everybody just translates when you say P to not P. So in fact, your lie just becomes the truth with a negation in front of it. So how do you, it looks like there's a lot of, would you say that there's a lot of irrational behavior going on here, or is it really because that there's this asymmetric information situation where we're really very bad at detecting lying, that makes lying actually a rational activity?
Well, it's kind of a snake. Is like lying is rational, yes, and we all do it a lot. But is rational because we know we're in this equilibrium where even though it might be easy to find out we're lying, no one really cares about whether we lie or not. Most of the time we just accept that our social equilibriums involves a lot of lying and a lot of letting it slide. Of course, as soon as you disrupt one element of the equilibrium with technology, that means all the other elements now are going to shift, which makes it, frankly, very, very difficult to anticipate what we're going to land on. Because it might be possible if we look at one disruption of one element from technology, but if technology is also disrupted the other elements, then it becomes completely unpredictable.
So I have a question concerning also the previous talk by Jean-Michel. So you mentioned about biases that you see in some populations. So concerning this issue of lies, do you know if there is a bias on countries, for instance, Europe, US, or is it in your study about this kind of behavior? Is it something that you are trying to follow also? If there is something that comes from culture on this?
Okay, so that's going to take us in a very different direction, but yeah, we do a lot of cross-cultural analysis in our work. Sometimes nothing much happens. Sometimes you find very different things. So, okay, very, very, very briefly, but what we've been doing recently was to try to test like a simple psychological model of why different countries have so very different fears of seeing AI deployed in one or another occupation. That is, if we look at different countries in the world, you will see that the pattern of fear about AI is very different. In some places, people are completely okay with doctors being replaced by AI, but they're very, very worried about judges being replaced by AI. And in some other countries, you have the opposite pattern. And so we looked at this pattern for 6 different occupations where you could deploy AI and look at the different patterns of fear in different places in the world. And we showed that basically we can explain these patterns with a very simple model which is that when people think, do I care about journalists being replaced by AI, they do this mental exercise where they do a checklist of the kind of qualities or features they accept from a good human journalist. They go through the checklist of what AI, how good AI can be at having this feature and qualities, and the matching, or in this case, the mismatch between these two checklists give them their fear. And so the different patterns of fear about AI that you find across the world are basically just a result of the joint variations between these two things. That is that in different countries, people have a different ideal profile of what a journalist is, what a judge is, what a doctor is. In different countries, people have a different mental profile of the kind of qualities AI can display. And so if you have these two things, then you can predict very accurately the level of fear that you will find about AI in a given occupation and in a given country.
Thank you very much. One more question, maybe? Okay. So if not, so we take now the first break. So we come here at 11. So we have half an hour break because unfortunately Jérôme Bolt, who was supposed to do the next talk, cannot come today. He has a virus, so it's probably better for us as well. So it's a pity, but he cannot come. So we will come back here at 11 and finish at noon at the same time. So thank you very much, Jean-François.